I'm going as well to comment on some points that you have mentioned with respect to the infrastructure and its definition. This is an important point. When we talk about infrastructure, we have the traditional aspect about it, but there are types, and the broadband issue, of course, needs to be improved. Something that has to do with that is that we need to employ the female and women, because this is part of the labor force that's not used. And we conducted a survey to identify the problems, and one of the key problems is access to internet, because access to internet can develop a project. So these are things that should be considered by the state. This is one thing. The second point, with respect to exportation, it's not about what to export and what to consume. And we have conducted a survey that tackles the value chains to identify investment opportunities, entrepreneurship and its importance, and risks. The best country was Israel. And this is something that makes me sad, because we need to reduce risks of entrepreneurship. In addition to what was mentioned by Mr. Khaled, one of the companies that uses oil, the waste of the frying oil is treated in a certain way and is used in other for other purposes, like the vehicles. And they have a problem, because when they buy oil from people, they do not have a bill or an invoice, so they lose, so they do not pay taxes. So encouraging entrepreneurship is not by words, but with so many other things, by giving them priority. The labor force, the market size is due to the population increase, but our problem is that we consider the labor force as a burden. How many graduates we want to employ per year, while these are actually our wealth and our benefit, profit. We are going to end by you. Thank you, Doctor. When we look to these reports, my critic that is inside of me starts to tackle the positive points. The first thing, the ministerial committee that you have mentioned, that was developed to study this issue. I think if I'm a president of a prime minister, I have to gather the competent ministers and give them assignments that you need to improve your ranking with respect to competitiveness. So this is going to be his homework throughout the year, not to take it and put it in a drawer, for example. So I think this is important to improve our rankings in these reports. We cannot be 90 and Israel 20 and other countries that have better rankings. So I'm going to talk quickly about the methodology of the selection of the sample. I like always to take a step back, not to tackle the report after it has been issued. I want to tackle the sample, whether it is fixed yearly or differs from each year. Part is fixed and half of it is variable. So you have a scientific criteria, and this is something important for me. This questionnaire is sent to all countries of the world. So the questions are the same for all the countries, or we develop our own sample for only us. Anyhow, this is a methodology. The macroeconomy, it was important for me to know the type of the questions that you were sending for the people to ask them about the macroeconomy and how you identify these figures. Dr. Ahmed, also the debt. The external debt is not important for me with respect to the GDP. America or USA has excessive debt, and Japan as well. But what matters for me is how I'm going to reimburse it. What are my resources? Of course, it is big and it has reached 100%, as you have said. But I'm afraid and terrified of the fact that whether we have a big matrix to identify the due dates of the loans and how we are going to reimburse them and from where and these things, this is what worries me. So I wanted to know, when you send people to ask them these questions, do you identify conclusions after that, or what do you do? I have as well the infrastructure. People who say that a country pays a lot of money on infrastructure, so this is something good. But despite the fact that we spend a lot of money on infrastructure, we are still ranking the 70 on the world. So we have not wasted a lot. So this is something that we can answer or use to answer the critics that say that we spend a lot on infrastructure. There are strange or weird figures. The terrorist attacks, we are ranking 136. I cannot recall all these amounts of attacks to make us ranking the 136, 100. So where are we from Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq? I just doubt some figures. With respect to the stability of the macroeconomy, this is what matters for me. Where is the stability of the financial policies and the parallel economy and the financial inclusiveness? Are we collecting taxes or not? Macroeconomy is now limited to two dynamics. What do you mean by dynamics? I can't understand what do you mean by dynamics of that, but we need to include other factors regardless of the dynamics of the debts and the inflation rate, the exchange rate, the GDP, the hard currency, all these things. Competitiveness. Competitiveness with respect to services, we are ranking the 33rd. Has anybody complained of the competitiveness between the state and the private sector? Is there is a free and complete competitiveness in Egypt, or we are worse than the 33rd? This is a question. I think that our ranking has to deteriorate a little bit due to the interference of the state in the work of the private sector, and this is not a secret. We are all complaining about that. This is what I have. With respect to the financial system, I doubt that we have received risks on financial aspects. I think that we do not, the venture capital is not understood by so many people, and it includes entrepreneurship. As part of the ballots goes to the um, entrepreneurship, or what the daily circulation rate in the stock change. We have to know the amount of the circulation of the Egyptian money on daily basis. Egypt cannot rank 21st in the per capita, the GDP per capita. In 2017, we are ranking the 103rd. Number one was China. We have to see who changed. The poverty line has increased, so we cannot rank the 21st. The individual share has improved. The per capita has improved. What happened to make our GDP per capita improves that much? So this is the change that we have witnessed. the one-stop shop. What are the companies that adopt non-constructive ideas? The performance of Egypt, we are ranking the 89 with respect to those who adopt non-constructive ideas and build businesses for them. Can't understand this, but anyhow, this is my comment. We have not developed this report. We are not the entity that develops the report. We send questionnaires to all the countries of the world, and we receive it from WAF, and we exert a lot of effort, the team that we have mentioned, to explain the questions. When you say, for example, the venture capital and people cannot understand this, we explain these things so that the answers are better. But the questions, part of them is general and other things that have to do with the questionnaires. It's not about us. We are not those who include the figures, and we are not calculating anything that has to do with the ECES. We just include the information that we receive from the questionnaires. And then we send them the results. Then they do the ranking. And we have questions that we did not include in the presentation because we are going to get back to them to ask them how did they do this. So the destructive companies, this is something that they have mentioned, not us. A translation as well, we receive it and we adjust it because they have issues in that. So we have not ignored anything, and we have not calculated anything. We have not included anything on our own. We introduced this and evaluated as you do. We just make sure that it's sent to the companies, and we have explained the questions as much as possible for the companies, and this is our role. I just want to comment on some points before we open the floor for discussion, because there are things that we have not tackled. The institutional dimension, this is not tackled, and this is something disastrous. You are upset because we are ranking late with respect to terrorist attacks, but there are other things that we are ranking very high in, and it's not normal. For example, the responsiveness of the government to change. We started to have this, to improve this. The long-term vision of the state or of the government, the 2030 agenda, for example. These are the things that are making us ranking so high. And when we tackle the negative aspects of the institutions, when we talk about quality of management of lands, this is something sensitive for us. Why? Because we have conducted a comprehensive survey with Dr. Sahar, and we talked with the president's representatives and Mr. Ibrahim Nahlib. We tackled all the problems that have to do with the system of managing the lands and how to solve this with changing laws and regulations. And we sent it to all the people, and we have not achieved any improvement. We are going to rank very late as well in that respect. It's not about ranking, it's about assessing the pulse of the public and the opinion of the public, to assess our position from this. Allow me to just allow him to comment on the questionnaire. With respect to the sample, this report depends on 70% of these indicators, and the source is international indicators, and 30% only from the questionnaires. So now we depend on international reports, and this has its own advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes it is not it's subjective to the opinion, according to the opinion of people, and the questionnaire was 140 questions. They were summarized into 67 questions. That's why they depend 70% on the international reports of World Bank, UNCTAD, and IMF. This is number one. With regard to the sample, the questionnaire is worldwide. We do not change anything. We just may modify the accents or the dialects of the questionnaire so that the business community of each country understands it. This is the only thing that we change. With regard to the sample, it has rules. And 50% is from the past sample, the old sample, and 50% is newcomers. I have some quick comments. The role of the state, regardless of the report. The state is now working on reducing bureaucracy. Most of the things that you have mentioned is engaged with our bureaucracy, and this is something that needs further sessions to tackle. The second thing, with respect to, I agree with what Dr. Khaled has said. With regard to imports, there are strategic goods, wheat, corn, fuel, oil, the basics, and we are not competing in that. And thus, today we have to assess our value added. We have to increase exports, not necessarily reduce imports. This is one point. The second point, deepening the industry. We cannot do this on all the fields because we do not have economy of scales. We can buy components from outside with reasonable prices, and this is not the case internally. The other points that I want to add, please. Savings today, we always have a gap with respect to funding. There are data on that the savings tools in Egypt are scarce, and when we find out that the investing capitals or the money invested in real estate is much more than the deposits in banks, this is something. This gives us a hint. So if we have savings tools that are varied and diverse in Egypt, this might change the scene. We are a cash economy, where a cashless economy is another direction. So we have to tackle details, because if we take things from the surface, this might be misleading. The information infrastructure, we are talking about 4G, even it is deficient. It's one of the areas that we are not running the 4G with its capacity. So imagine the 5G. So when we invest billion of dollars in roads and streets, this is something good, but we have to invest. We need like 1 billion and half to upgrade the 4G, and this is something simple. So why we cannot include it in our agenda? Some information with respect to our future of work. 48.5% of the sectors of Egypt are able to adopt the digitalization. And it's going to happen anyway. So that's why we have to take the initiative. 11.9 million jobs are capable of being replaced with digital jobs. And we have assigned $88 billion to do that. With respect to digitalization, we have conducted a survey on 500 companies, and it was conducted by the ILO. there is a mismatch between the graduates of universities and the labor market. This is not in Egypt only, it's across the world, including the USA. We have now 30% of the current jobs that are done from home, and this is going to increase in the future. The digital economy is one of the most fast increasing economy. 78% of the companies are going to have direct access to this digital space. So who's planning the general strategy, or who is developing the general strategy for us? Among the problems that we are facing as well, the security concepts. In what sense? You have mentioned the digital economy with respect to agriculture. A country like India, which is similar to us, it has fragmentation of lands and so on. The technology and artificial intelligence and the drones that they use and the level of the smallholders increase the productivity by 30 or 40 or 50%. This is a technology of the shelf. Now, a big part of it I cannot employ it because we need security clearance. So the security we have a misconception with this with respect to security. We have to reconsider security and how we deal with the young startups or the technology. These were some comments that I wanted to add. Thank you so much.
Of course, the security mentality set is problematic, interfering of the government in the private sector. We don't have investment portfolios for citizens. Citizens either buy real estate or start a saving account. No, we need to reform everything, including institutions. Dr. Gehan, the floor is yours. I will respond to the 3 points. First, imports, industry and savings. When I referred to imports, it was just a remark. How can we turn that into an opportunity? But of course, the structure or the basket of imports is well designed, and I don't mean that we can replace imports, but we can find an opportunity. Since we are a big market, we can work on that. This is also in tandem with the promoting industry, because we are working on a strategy in the automotive sector. Replacing imports is not defective or is not problematic, but when there is a business or an economic case, just as Mr. Tarek said, we are not competitive in everything, so sometimes it's not worth it. And the center is doing an analysis for that. As economists, we understand that we cannot replace all the imports, but there are other areas in the value chain that we can replace. We are working on a strategy in the automotive sectors, and this analysis takes into consideration the economies of scale and the value chain, the companies that can feed automotive industry. So we are taking everything into consideration. But generally speaking, I was referring to an opportunity. Yes, of course, we should restructure the saving portfolios. At the end of the day, we still have a gap in financing. Even if we restructure the system, let me tell you that we will still be needing investments. So we have already attracted a number of investments and it's paying off. We have tried to improve the investment climate. We can do so. Of course, there are a set of challenges, and we're trying to address the deficiencies we identified. And I'm not speaking as a government or as a representative government. I'm speaking about the public sector, private sector, the NGOs. So, sorry, Dr. Ahmed. Doc, I just wanted to refer to something on. I will be brief anyway. The main point is that we need to structure or restructure the administrative machinery in the state. Because here's the question, why do the private sector companies set policies? It should be a joint effort between the government and the private sector to do what needs to be done regarding the policies. Dr. Khaled referred to people going in circles to be supported. Again, this takes us back to public policies. We need someone to be following the trends and then to be selective when it comes to policies to unlock the potential of these new startups. Dr. Gehan referred to the automotive industry, and I have a conviction that in a country like Egypt, with the growth going on, automotive can be the driver of the development. And here I'm not referring to assembling cars, maybe I'm referring to certain components. I came back from South Africa very recently. I visited there a number of factories, and they started 20 years ago. But the role played by the state was in line or in tandem with the private sector. So I cannot start a policy without the other party. Here, let me go back to the word administrative reform. Because if we have an upper ceiling of the wages and then the currency was devalued, so we need to review that. Because our counterparts in the government should care for the rights of the citizens. We have a big deficiency in this regard. I want to comment briefly on imports in the industry. Here we are talking about competitiveness. How can we be competitive? You need to have rare raw materials, or you need to have certain raw material you offer for a very affordable prices, or you might have a well qualified cadre, or you export a lot, or you have a niche in the market. So you need to know what do you have in order to be able to be competitive. But the fact that we can produce pencils instead of buying these pencils from China, this can be a very narrow-minded perspective. So you need to think of your competitive strengths points, because it's a merciless world. Egyptian engineers cost are cheaper regarding or compared to other engineers. Technicians in Egypt are well paid compared to their own productivity. So they get more than what workers or technicians get in South Asia. So in labor intensive industry, we cannot compete. But when it comes, for example, to engineering, we have one of the startups designing perfect machines. They design these machines better than China and cheaper than China, because they are engineers graduated from the University of Mansoura, and they are excellent. I can praise, or I can sing their praises forever. So if the 30 or 40% goes to the engineering design, then we can be competitive. But if we want to produce springs, for example, then mass production won't be a plus to us. So we need to look for the human capital. We have raw material. But do we link that to industry? Do we know where to invest in which sectors? Yeah, maybe in ceramics, along with other industries. We are trying to link the availability of raw material to the landscape of industry. So competitiveness is not an easy thing. You need to take all the details into consideration. Otherwise, you will get lost and industries will not progress. So you need to have niche markets. So even in automotives, you cannot compete with the giants. You would search for certain components and then you can search a niche. So, for example, a city or a village in Pakistan produces 70% of the football. So these bowls are sewed in Pakistan, and this is a niche. Um, Hundreds of thousands of women in this village are working in this industry. We need to find niches, and you cannot just shoot in the dark. You need to identify things. We need to help a startup build a niche. I cannot agree with you more. We need to identify opportunities